Hello and welcome to BUtalks, the podcast where we build our souls as well as our CVs. Today we are interviewing Dr. Avril Aitken, who has been working in the School of Education since 2006 and is currently the chairperson of the Education Department here at Bishop's University. Dr. Aitken dedicates much of her time to education within the Indigenous communities of Quebec, and she also tries to improve the education system as a whole.
We would first like to acknowledge the territory on which we hold BUtalks as the traditional and unceded territory of the Abenaki First Nations, the Abenaki Confederation. In performing land acknowledgement, we make what was invisible visible. We invite the land, the First Nations people, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission into our everyday conversation.
So we would like to thank the Experiential Learning Internship Grant Fund,
the Bishop's Bookstore,
and the Advancement Office for making this podcast series possible. We'd like to start off just by getting to know you a little bit better and make you as comfortable as possible.
Okay.
We've heard that you like to use snacks in your classroom, so we decided to bring along one of your favorites, which is beet chips, we've heard.
That's so funny. Particularly since I discovered another type of beet chip as well.
Oh, which one is that?
I don't know the brand. Should I be eating on camera?
Yeah.
Will it make a particularly crunchy sound? I actually don't know if I've had these particular beet ones, so I'm eager to try them. I was pretty enthusiastic about the beet chips, I have to say. And the snack part, right now I'm teaching a course that runs, there's a practicum embedded in the course, and so the classes are long, they're 4 hours long. And they run from 1:30 to 5:30. And there's this moment, where you see everyone in the room who's kind of like, it's like 4 in the afternoon. So the snacks are there for me as much as them, because actually increasing the engagement is really important. We've got so much to do in a short period of time. So that's it. Thank you for the snacks.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm sure they must get really hungry during that long class, and it must keep them focused a little bit more on what you're saying.
So to get familiar with your background, we'd like to start by asking you to tell us a bit about your upbringing and education.
I'm originally from Montreal. My family actually had a cottage down here in the townships, and I'm not sure why, but it never occurred to me to attend Bishop's. And I think that at the time, my husband actually went to Bishop's, and at the time I think there might have been 600 or 700 students here, so that may be why I wasn't really aware of it. I now look back and think this would have been an ideal place for me, but I ended up going, first of all, to Queen's. After a year at Queen's, I really felt it was not my place. And I'm not sure if you're from Montreal or Quebec, but for me there's a tremendous cultural difference between Montreal and cities in Ontario. And even though I'm an Anglophone, a bilingual Anglophone, there were things about the Montreal and Quebec context that I missed, and so I went back to McGill and finished at McGill.
And what did you major in?
I started out in philosophy at Queen's.
Okay.
And I'm just going to throw this out there because I don't get to say this very often. My highest mark was in Latin. I really was loving what I was doing, but while I was in Kingston, I was volunteering in a school. And I really loved it. And so I knew there was an education program at McGill as well, so I ended up switching into education at McGill.
That must have been a big change.
It was a huge change. And actually there were so many of my courses from Queen's that weren't credited, so it was pretty much like starting over again. My parents came to Canada just before I was born, and so they traveled a lot, and so they really had this perspective that you make your home where you live. And so after I finished teaching, I was looking for work, and it didn't matter to me where I worked, and so I ended up working in the North for 17 years. And
that's why, with the Indigenous community.
Yeah,
right?
And that in your introduction where you said that I had this participation and commitment, part of it is because I spent so many years there. I raised my family there.
Wow, that must have been really quite an experience.
Yeah, really wonderful experience. So many great things. Really questioned what education should be doing, who we are as a nation, and it was really a more impactful experience. I don't know if impactful is a word, but greater experience than actually the university years leading up to it. So I did my master's while, back and forth at McGill, but, while I was teaching.
Oh, at the same time. So you were going back in the in the summers?
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Professional master's programs that are geared for people who are in different professions are often set up in this way. And I did things. There was not a lot of internet at the time, but we had fax machines, and so I'd be faxing in my information. It seems crazy now. Yeah, and so then I moved out when it was time to do a PhD, and I was motivated because of my years in the North and my experience working in that way. So that's the early stuff. Yep.
Can you tell us maybe a little bit about the reserve you worked on?
Yes. So the Naskapi Nation of Kawachkamas is it's on the Quebec-Labrador border. So many people hear about the James Bay Northern Quebec Agreement, which was signed in 1975. And the members of the Naskapi Nation were not signatories to that first land claims. It's one of the first contemporary land claims in the country. And they weren't signatories, but the territory that was affected by the James Bay hydroelectric investment and changes really had an impact on their land as well. So in 1978, they actually signed an agreement, the Northeastern Quebec Agreement. This is your mini history lesson. Yes. And so it meant that when I arrived there, I graduated in 1980. So when I went north, they had recently signed this agreement, and so they were in the process of actually, building a new reserve, shifting from being in a small, not well-resourced reserve close to a town that had been a mining town, and then and attending a public school in the town where the classes were segregated. I have a lot that I could say, but I won't.
I'm sure.
To actually building their own community in a location that was interesting to them. And during that period of time, so many massive changes. So really it was such an amazing privilege to work in the community, and I've continued to work with the community on ensuring that their language is part of the school environment, that there's actually now an immersion program, well, not immersion, but so instruction up to grade 3 is in their first language. So that's something that I've seen since 1980 sort of take shape.
Wow, that's really interesting.
How was your experience not only teaching, but living and raising your family on the Naskapi Nation's reserve?
I can't... first of all, I need to say that the reserve, as it was growing, didn't actually have a place for housing. They were under-resourced for housing for everyone. So teachers who were not from the community had to live in this little adjacent community close by. So we used to go back and forward, but we were all part of a community. And there's another nation that lives there as well, the Innu Nation of Metsmikosh. So really, in this particular community, there would have been 4 languages happening all the time: English, French, Naskapi, and Innu. And so what I would say in raising my family there is that, so for my children growing up, often because they spoke French and English, there were always many children at our house because we were on a lake and on a dead-end road. And so sometimes the conversation would be in English, and sometimes in French, and sometimes Naskapi, and sometimes Innu, and all kinds of combinations of everything.
That must have been really confusing sometimes, especially if you're trying to learn the languages and stuff.
I would say that when children play, their actions and hearts say it all.
True.
And so, yeah, there are so many things that I would say. I've told the students in my class how amazing it is to me that that my children had this opportunity to be in the middle of a herd of caribou or experience having other animals like fox close by, looking out the window and seeing different animals and for that being a natural part of life. But I'm that's sort of aside. That's kind of the natural world. I can't underline how amazing it is for me. I'll be 60 soon, to think about what I learned in working with people in in a First Nation community, because what I have come to understand about what it means to be collegial, what it means to understand shared goals, what it means to take responsibility for each other. Like, I experience that every day, and I really came to see that we live a very individualistic and not interdependent lifestyle, increasingly so. So I'm so grateful that those values are something that became so natural for me, and I'm so glad that my children, in growing up in that context, they embody that in what they do, even though they live in Montreal and live differently. It's that understanding that you're part of a community, like really feeling you're part of a community.
Wow, that's really nice. How would you say, like, you've kind of brought your experiences back to the Bishop's campus? Like, have you kind of tried to integrate some of your experiences, or?
Okay, the food.
Of course.
I think what I would say is that I think that my colleagues would say that I feel I have a responsibility to them, and that I feel really connected to the students and their aspirations. What I would say is, like, in my teaching in the North, classrooms are very small, and we developed very, very meaningful relationships with our students, and that's really where the joy for me is in teaching. It's what drives you to be creative or even risk-taking. Like, I do some crazy things in the class, like deciding I'm going to try podcasting myself, which I did, and we've done augmented reality and use, like, when new programs have been coming out, I'm saying to them, I'm going to try this out, and like, bear with me, and we're going to see what we can do. So I would say that's something that I bring from that experience, is that we had to be resourceful and creative and collaborative, and I try to model that in the teaching that I'm doing, while also showing that if you're a lifelong learner, then you're going to be trying things. It's not about perfecting something; it's about being able to stand and watch yourself as you're learning and learn from that.
Wow, and do you also kind of feel like when you're in the classroom, even though you're a teacher and you have your students, you're like trying to make it more of a collaboration? You want to be like on the same level as them, and I feel like that might be a really
Think of your students as partners, sort of?
Yes, I do. And actually what I would say is, when people come into my classroom, I think what they see is a lot of collaboration. And that part of that is because I really operate from the perspective that your knowledge is constructed collaboratively, and so, like, I could stand at the front and lecture. I think I've got a lot of knowledge about the information that's happening in the class, but what seems important to me is to create an environment where the students are engaging with these ideas and trying to figure out how they might fit together or not. So sometimes it's impossible to give everyone the opportunity to have the environment exactly as you want, but I try as much as possible to create a democratic environment with this goal at the end that we have to know how to do this, or we have to know why these theories are so significant.
One of our questions is, we'd like to know how you help students build their souls rather than CVs, inside and outside of the classroom.
Oh, wow, what a great question.
Deep question, eh?
One thing that I do, I think this is actually pretty selfish, I'm looking at the camera to say this, is that so I do try to actually, sometimes I tell, like, stories or experiences that I've had. I feel that that's an important way, because I think teaching and learning is significant to me because of these contexts in which I discovered these new things, or saw someone discovering something themselves. So for me, I think telling the story and showing its significance to me is about modeling for them that's where the joy will come in the teaching, is in those interpersonal discoveries, being with someone when they're learning something, and maybe nudging them along or learning something new. I don't know if that answered your question. That's a good question. I like the...
Yeah.
I'm going to think about that.
We also know that you do the integrative course for the education department.
I love that course.
Yes. So, like, how do you kind of decide when your students are ready to become teachers, and do you have a specific criteria? Because you're like kind of sending them off into the teaching world, right? Like you must have a...
We do. Well, we actually, so technically we work with a framework that the ministry gives us. It's sort of the challenge, you have to meet these. It's with a professional program where there's certification. You have to actually prove that the students have attained a certain level of competency. I hate all these words. I like the meaning behind them, that the idea that we do continue to develop after. I don't think we necessarily say you're ready. We do it together because there are associate teachers in the field and supervisors and professors, and we're all like contributing. So let's say in that course, I'm not really answering your question, but so there's an interview in that course where they actually have to like demonstrate their growth and talk about, use the framework, use all of their experiences of 4 or 5 years, and speak about how they understand themselves. So then they have interviews at different points during the program, so we get to see them over time.
And like how they've evolved.
Yeah, and because this is one thing that I don't like about being the chairperson, or I was the interim dean for a year, is that it takes me out of the classroom. If I can see the students in the first year, and then the second year, and then the third year, and then during the interdisciplinary course, then I'm really so able to see how they have actually evolved, like the questions that they had in the beginning, to see what their questions are afterwards. It's just
completely changed.
Yeah, and it's so wonderful to see it. I have been thinking about that recently, that we're supposed to have a program approach, and unless we're able to imagine the people going through this program, the notion of a program is a bit empty. So being able to follow them is important.
Intergenerational trauma is a big issue in the education system. How do you think we can mend these relationships and improve on this, other than just land acknowledgements? And what kind of changes do you think we can do to have a difference and an impact? Do you think that we can help change the conversation about Indigenous people? So
part of my research with Linda Radford of the University of Ottawa looks at this whole question of how we would prepare teachers to do reconciliation-focused work in schools. Have you heard of the words together, truth and reconciliation? So the truth part is all about the long history of removing children forcibly from their homes and putting them in institutional care, that schools, and there were all kinds of laws and policies that went along that really pretty much stripped Indigenous people of their capacity to be together as families, to live well, to practice cultural practices, to sustain their language, to have a certain degree of dignity, like so many things. That's a painful truth, and if we only treat that painful truth as being a history that we need to know about, then what it doesn't do is engage us individually in thinking about how, for many of us, we're privileged, or we have privilege because we have not experienced those things. So, we might look around and take for granted that tuition is not expensive in Quebec, so many people should be able to go to university. But there are all kinds of factors, for example, that continue to have a negative impact on the capacity of Indigenous people to make decisions for themselves. And so that's a lot there, but I'll try and restate it. We can't treat the truth of the residential school policies and practices, which ended in 1996, as part of being our past. There are all kinds of privileges that exist for certain people in the country that are part of ongoing colonial imbued policies and practices. And so the truth part is acknowledging that we benefit, because I'm a non-Indigenous person, that we continue to have benefits that are not made available to other people for a whole host of reasons that are not visible to us necessarily. And in living up north, I can say that I witnessed it, so many times, and I have seen it with the students that I had who went out for Cégep or university who were called names or couldn't rent apartments, who wouldn't be served in restaurants. So some of these are like, wow, they seem like minor things, but it's difficult for a lot of people to imagine that those things would happen over and over. You see how deeply systemic it is. So that's the thing.
So that's the truth part.
The truth part. It's not just the past. There's all kinds of acts of systemic racism that are carried on, and you can find out about them. So many of the metaphors around reconciliation are about harmony and peace building. And so the problem is that I feel that we can't move into peace building without actually moving through this very difficult encounter with what our own implications are. What benefits do I have? And I'll give you an example. I married someone whose family have lived in the Gaspé for 6 or 7 generations on a beautiful piece of land. They had a post office and general store. We actually have that house now. I have no idea how they came to have that large piece of land, which is beautifully situated, and a large tract that was part of a farm. So we now own a piece of land that was in the family for, say, 7 generations, with a woodlot. It was a farm. It's right on the Baie des Chalots, beautiful place, but I really don't know how it is they came to own that. And when we think about bishops and how, I think this is in one of Jean Menor's papers, that David Thompson, the surveyor, he was aided by the Abenaki people to survey the land, and then once the land was surveyed, the people were moved out, and it's only 10 years later that Bishops was founded. So it's things like that that we don't see and we don't realize have this ongoing impact. So when we speak about reconciliation in its warm and happy tones about relationships, it's a problem because it kind of makes it look like we can turn the page from the past and just move on and try to be more humane or equitable or respectful and not actually do anything to change the conditions that allow those acts of systemic racism to continue. I don't know, I have to tell you, sometimes when I'm speaking, my ideas are a bit jumbled, so I don't know if that actually came out clearly, but that's really what I would say. And what could we do at Bishops?
Exactly, I'm just a student, how could I kind of help out? I know we have Orange Shirt Day.
Yes, so
maybe something like this, or
at Senator Murray Sinclair's talk, one of the students said, "What can I do?" And I thought he gave a pretty brilliant answer. He said, contact your elected representatives. We can do things like wear Orange Shirt Day, which will raise orange shirts on Orange Shirt Day, which will raise awareness. But the problems that continue to exist, like the fact that water is, drinkable water is not available on so many reserves, or the fact that there are human rights tribunals that the government blocks, and there's legal money going into preventing certain things from happening. So even though it took a long time for certain principles around care to be respected by the government, a good example is in the news this week where children who are ill, let's say, are flown out of communities on a Challenger jet, and there's no room for the parents on the jet. And Quebec is one of the few provinces where this exists. It happens to be the case. It's probably the plane itself and the problems of having, people on the plane, but it's still something that people have been asking for some time. So how is it that these minor things that wouldn't impact us because the hospital's around the corner, we never think about our drinking water, it's always there. We can do things to be more open and respectful, but if we pushed, as he was saying, our elected representatives to actually make some changes in the quality of the conditions for Indigenous people, that would be a good first step. And I think here, if there was a student movement to insist that there be courses on colonization and decolonization at the university, there's some universities where it's an essential course within the first year, that it's just part of what does it mean to be a post-secondary student. in Canada at this point in time, well, you absolutely have to take this course.
Which other initiatives and charities have you participated in or founded at Bishops?
Okay.
And can you also tell me a bit about your involvement in the Quebec Lodge on the board?
Oh, yes, I can.
I'm sure you have lots of stories.
Okay, so I when I came here, actually the first day I was here, I was being toured around the campus, and at the time the director of the programs, before we had a dean, Kathy Beauchamp, she introduced me to a couple of people who were working on the MESOT education project, and also the student refugee sponsorship program. So I just began working in those right away, because it just seemed like a great way to both get to know the community a bit and use my time well. And at a certain point I had to decide which way I would go, because it's, as you know, there's only so many hours in the day.
Of course.
So I started to invest more time in the MESOT project, but I was just joining in. So I don't really think that I have started up any new innovation, although I would say that when I was the interim dean, I rallied the professors around the Accord on Indigenous Education, which was a document that came out through the Canadian Deans of Education, and through discussion of that we created 2 courses. So on our books we have the Colonization, Decolonization and Education course, and a course in Indigenous Education which we've not yet run, because we would like it to be taught by an Indigenous professor. So I think of that as being something that I didn't initiate it, but because of my own experience, I felt that the School of Education could take a further step in that direction. We do have the capacity here to, really. It's not some. I'm going to come back to the building souls. I think everyone's really soulful, and that some people, it's harder for some people than others to either reveal that to others or to feel comfortable expressing it in public ways, and that if they can learn to see their own, feel it in the classroom, then I think they will be those,
bring it out of them kind of thing. Oh.
Well, thank you so much for participating in our podcast.
Thank you so much. We're glad to have you here and answered all of our hard questions.
It was great. I loved it. And I know this might sound surprising, but I'm a bit of a sociophobe. Like I'm really a real introvert.
No, you did really well. You answered all of our questions.
Yeah, it's part of I've learned, that if something is really important to me, then I need to actually, express it in a way that other people can feel it. So, so thank you for that opportunity. It was I actually had to say to myself, can you do this?
You did it.
I did it, and everything's fine.
Yay, thank you.
Thanks so much.